Hello, this is Stuart Bray back again with video number 3 in the Coraline series, and this time we're taking a look at the moulding process. Okay, the first thing we need to do is take our finished sculpt on the core, and we need to create an overflow area around the outside edge. So we're going to create a built up sort of thickness from the edge of the sculpt to the edge of the mould and fill that all in. And the way we do that quite easily is to roll out some sausages of plastiline like this, push them flat around the outside edge, and basically follow the exact shape of the sculpt very closely. And you go around your keys, leave the centre clear, and go around the whole appliance, and then you just blend them across. Make them as smooth as possible, either with your thumb or with tools, whatever works best, but basically you create the whole thing. Continue this all around the whole area until the whole thing is covered. Next, using a sharp sculpting tool, cut back the edge very slightly to create your cutting edge. And here you have your finished cutting edge and overflow. Once this is done, the next thing we need to do is spray it with a release agent so that the mould doesn't stick to this core. And I'm using here a spray wax. Once the wax has dried, I talc the surface and dust it off. This stops the gel coat from sliding off the waxy surface so easily. Next, I mix the gel coat as before. I drizzle it all over and then use a brush just to make sure I get all the details. Once this is set, I apply a second gel coat. Again, I just want to make sure I got all the detail and we've got a good, strong, thick layer all over. Once this is nearly set, I measure out a large amount of carbon fibre mixture, and then to scoop out an amount I need, 300 grams seems to be enough for the first coat. Weigh out the hardener, and then add the hardener to the mix. It's important to mix the hardener in very well. Now, as you can see here, my gloves split whilst I was mixing it. This is a very good reason why I always wear 2 gloves if I can when doing this mixing, because vinyl gloves particularly have a habit of splitting if they're a little bit tight. The second gel coat is set, but it's still slightly tacky. This is the perfect time to go on with the carbon fibre. Make sure that the edges aren't too thin. There's a tendency for the edges to kind of end up being the thinnest part, so make sure you make a point of going around those edges and thickening those up. I figured I need another mix, a little bit more than the last time, so I mix up 400 grams this time, just to create the right thickness, which was about 18 millimeters, 3/4 of an inch. After a few hours it's set up, but it's not quite solid, and this is a good time to go around with the surf form and cut back the edge to create a neater finish. You want to cut it back so that you can actually clearly see the mould and the core and a thin layer of plastiline overflow separating the two, like this. Okay, I'll leave this overnight to harden up. So the next morning, check it's okay, and I open it up with a large screwdriver. As you can see, the mould opened okay. We can reuse the plastiline inside this mould, so it's time to clean it out and keep it all together. Not only can we reuse this plastiline, but it also gives you a good idea of the volume of material we're going to need when we come to inject this with gelatine. Make sure before you start cleaning out the plastiline that the desk you're working on is a clean space. It peels out quite easily, but if you want to use a tool to clean it out, I suggest you use a wooden tongue stick like this. Wooden tools are much better because metal tools can scratch the inside surface of the mould and we don't want to do that. Because wooden sculpting tools can be broken accidentally, I suggest using wooden tongue sticks instead. There's still a residue of plastiline left on the mould surface and the core surface, and we can clean this off using a little lighter fluid. You can now see that when the mould and the core are together, there's still that little gap around the outside edge created by the overflow. The only area where the mould is actually touching the core is on the keys and that thin cutting edge where we cut back a neat edge around the outside edge. Now this means that when the mould is bolted together, all that pressure will press down on that edge, and that will result in a very good edge on the appliance. The excess gelatin that will come out when we inject it will be able to escape through that overflow, and that's why it's called the overflow. So the next thing I need to do is spray this mould with a release agent. I'm going to use a silicone oil spray just to make whatever we cast out of this piece come out of the mould nice and easy. Now the reason I'm using a silicone spray is because the thing I'm going to cast this appliance in is going to be gelatin, which you have to heat up to become molten in order for it to be fluid and then injected into the mould. And because it's very hot, it will melt any kind of wax or Vaseline that we would use as a release agent. So I tend to use a silicone oil release because that doesn't actually get sort of affected by heat in the same way that oils and waxes would. Now one little trick I like to do with a new mould, if I can, is to mix up a little bit of alginate and run a test appliance using alginate as the material. Now obviously I can't use this as an appliance, but what it does do is it lets me know how the mould is working and whether all the edges are going to come out nice and thin, and if there's any kind of problems with the mould going together. So I'm just going to mix up a little bit of alginate, stick this in the mould, clamp it together and leave it a couple of minutes for the alginate to set. Once that alginate is set, pop it open. And as you can see, the piece looks fine and the edges are pretty good. So I can be quite confident now that when I run this appliance that the first piece should come out, should be usable, because I can actually see how the mould has functioned. Now in order to get the gelatin into the mould, it's going to be easiest for me to inject it in from the back, and I need to make sure that the injection hole that comes through into the mould is at the thickest part of where the appliance will be. And using alginate is very handy for this because I can see quite clearly that the alginate is thickest here on the brow, so that's where I can drill my hole. So it's a very good way of actually seeing how the thickness of the piece is working. I made sure the angle that I drilled at was a good one from the syringe coming in through the back. I'm using a 9mm hole here, and make sure that I enlarge the hole on the back to accommodate the end of the syringe. We're now ready to cast out our next appliance in gelatin, which I'll be covering in the next video.